And we're back in the car, probably for not a full-length episode, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not-So-Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Friday evening here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. I just wanted to briefly speak on... Today would have been Alan Rickman's 79th birthday. I can't believe he's been gone 9 years. Most people didn't even know that he was sick. It was just a sudden shock when he passed. Those closest to him, unfortunately, knew that he was nearing the end, but most, even big fans of his didn't know, had no idea. Not everybody goes public on social media with illness, whether it's in the social media age times 10, now relative to, let's say, 20 years ago. But no one knew, certainly no fans knew, that he was nearing the end. And he's somebody who, he spanned the generations. As far as you look at his two most famous roles, as Hans Gruber in the original Die Hard, which came out in 1988, and Severus Snape in the Harry Potter films, the first of which came out, I believe, in 2001. The younger generations see him as Severus Snape. People under 30 are less likely to immediately identify him with, oh, that's Hans Gruber. They're going to say, it's Professor Snape. Gen Xers and young boomers will probably just see him equally as Hans Gruber and Severus Snape. My first thought, though, is Hans Gruber. And Die Hard was Alan Rickman's film debut. So he was around 41 when the movie was shot. And for somebody to simply move from the stage and or television, make a jump not into just any old movie, but a film that would become a touchstone, a landmark. It became a template for one movie after another for the next decade, where Hollywood kept repeating the same formula. And most of the villains in these kinds of films took their cues from how brilliant Alan Rickman's performance is as Hans Gruber. The terrorist who's actually not a terrorist, he's a thief. And from a conceptual standpoint, you're certainly not going to do this now, but the idea of pretending to be a terrorist is bonkers. He's pretending to be a terrorist because if he throws his intentions out there, I'm actually going to steal $600 million, well, they're going to handle it a little bit differently. And it's a component of the film that it has nothing to do with Alan Rickman's performance per se, but his bearing and his demeanor is that of a thief, not that of, let's just say, the Gary Oldman character in Air Force One. He's closer to, if you ask me for the nearest antecedent or somebody who came later who is simply looking to make money, Powers Booth in the Van Damme classic fucking Riot, Sudden Death, a movie that's now almost 30 years old, where he makes no bones about it, unlike Alan Rickman, where he has this kind of subterfuge of, I need you to release my comrades in the Volksfrei movement, the Asian Dawn movement, all of this nonsense. In Sudden Death, Powers Booth just wants, $500 million or whatever the amount. It's some disgusting amount of money. And the joke, of course, and I remember it's got a huge laugh in theaters, when the Vice President, Raymond J. Barry's character, asks Powers Booth as the big bad, what are you asking for so much money? And Powers Booth, with a straight face, goes, well, what do you expect in this economy? As if the economy has something to do with the hundreds of millions of dollars you ask for. Just gold. But in the world of Die Hard, it's a critical component to the plot. And Rickman's, the smoothness of his character, where he's somebody that under different circumstances, you could have a conversation with him, you could talk suits, You could probably talk Rolex watches. You could talk about all kinds of high-minded, literary, intellectual endeavors. He would be at home at a conference of tech billionaires if you just transported him into the future from 1988. It is such a galvanizing turn by him. It's almost difficult to quantify. And from a certain point of view, it's unfortunate, spoiler alert, that his character couldn't have become part of the franchise. And one thing that I liked about the Die Hard franchise is what they did with the third movie, Die Hard with a Vengeance. The Jeremy Irons character of Simon, it turns out his last name is Gruber, and he's Hans's brother. I gotta say, casting Jeremy Irons as Alan Rickman's brother was a masterstroke. You know, all props to John McTiernan, who directed Die Hards 1 and 3. Actually didn't do Die Hard Part 2, Die Harder. That was Rennie Harlan, who had a crazy summer. In 1990, had two major studio releases, one being Die Hard 2 and the other being a movie I love, one of the ultimate guilty pleasure movies from the decade, Adventures of Ford Fairlane, starring the notorious Andrew Dice Clay. But Rickman went from Die Hard, and he found it very easy to get work because everyone wanted to work with him, and he made some really interesting films, some of which he played more or less a lead, and others he played these sorts of quirky supporting roles. So he did a movie with Kevin Kline not long after Die Hard called The January Man, and Rickman still kind of had the beard from Die Hard, so it's possible the films were shot concurrently. I'm not sure about that. That was a very strange movie, and it gave the late, great Oscar winner Rod Steiger another opportunity to just chew it up. I mean, Rod Steiger was a guy, he could be interior, he could be quiet in movies such as The Pawnbroker, but when he wanted to chew the scenery, my God, he was unbelievable. January Man, he's just gesticulating and screaming and carrying on. And of course, The Specialist, speaking of guilty pleasure movies with Stallone, every line reading by him in that movie is just unbelievable, because he doesn't really have that much dialogue, and he wants to make every moment count. Rickman made a movie that a lot of people really loved. And the early 90s were an interesting time for romantic comedies / romantic dramas. There were a lot of high profile, big cast, often big director movies, such as the Gerard Depardieu, Andy McDowell, Peter Weir collaboration called Green Card. And there was, I don't remember who the actress was. Was it also Andy McDowell? I think I'm getting Andy McDowell mixed up here with somebody else. But there was a film with John Malkovich called The Object of Beauty. And I know that Andy McDowell was either in Green Card or The Object of Beauty, and I'm completely drawing a blank. But Alan Rickman, I think it was 1991, he did a movie that was like, it was a version of Ghost, is how I would describe it. It was a film where his character had passed and he continued to kind of communicate with his beloved. A little bit like many years later, a science fiction fantasy, the Robin Williams, What Dreams May Come. But that film showed that Alan Rickman, although, I mean, he was what you would call conventionally handsome, but he wasn't really leading man kind of an actor. He was more of a character actor. But in Truly Madly Deeply, he hit all the right notes, and it's just another one of those performances where you say, this guy was born to be in movies. He just looks great. He just looks great up there on screen. And also in 1991 is what many people would consider to be his third best performance as the Sheriff of Nottingham in Kevin Costner's Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, a movie that ended up being an enormous box office hit. I want to say it was the second biggest hit in the summer, of course, of Terminator 2. I don't think the movie is that good. I'm a big Kevin Costner fan. I like the little cameo. Sean Connery has a few laughs, and Christian Slater. I I just don't buy Kevin Costner as Robin of Locksley. I'm sorry. I can't see it. You know, the joke was he's less like Robin of Locksley and more like Kevin from California, which is fair. Alan Rickman as the Sheriff of Nottingham in the early cut, the filmmaker, very talented filmmaker, Kevin Reynolds. Waterworld aside, Reynolds is really good. He was so dominant. He was such an alpha character that Reynolds felt the need to cut a couple of his kind of showier moments or trim them because he was stealing the movie from the star. And there are times where somebody in a supporting role is so good, you just let him get away with it. For example, Dennis Quaid, speaking of Kevin Costner, in Wyatt Earp, he's so dynamic, even though he looks like he's dying. Dennis Quaid, who was already lean, dropped an additional 40 pounds, didn't quite get to the level of 10 years later where Christian Bale was ready for the morgue. But Dennis Quaid in Wyatt Earp looked like a bone rack. He looked like he needed a hospital. But that's a case where the filmmaker, Lawrence Kasdan, just gave Dennis Quaid, the actor, free rein to, I don't give a shit if you take the movie away from Kevin, because Kevin at that point really didn't have any ego in that particular situation, because his character of Wyatt Earp is the main character anyway. But Alan Rickman's turn, the multi-film, I guess, 6 films? I'm not even sure the count offhand. His turn as Severus Snape connected him to both the younger generation who maybe weren't familiar with Die Hard and were experiencing his kind of unique screen persona for the first time, and people such as myself who knew that he was going to knock it out of the park. And there's a movie that he did in the late 90s, just before Harry Potter, Galaxy Quest, it's good, but I don't see it as the classic that so many people do. But not surprisingly, Alan Rickman steals the film. He is fantastic. He's the best thing about the movie. Sigourney Weaver is funny. I don't love Tim Allen's performance. Tim Allen, I see what he was trying to do. He's basically pretending to be William Shatner. It's a Star Trek kind of a parody thing. Rickman in that movie, every scene with him is a home run. He just had that. He had that something extra where even if it wasn't written that well, he somehow managed to always make it memorable. And what he did as Severus Snape, you can't really quantify it, because depending on which part or which book, if you want to put it that way, that you are watching, Snape either is mildly villainous but with a heart of gold, seemingly full-on villainous, somewhere in between, or a guy who just unfortunately had an unrequited love and is holding that against the child of the guy who ended up with his betrothed, or whatever word you want to use to describe it. I guess that wouldn't be the right word, but you get my drift. His line readings in the Harry Potter movies, he doesn't miss. There is a level of concentration in his performance that it's just a thing of beauty. Each film, he could have been nominated for supporting actor. That's how good he is. And when I think of him, I think of Hans Gruber. You ask me who's the single greatest villain? One off, not Dracula, but the single greatest villain in the history of Hollywood? I'm gonna say Hans Gruber. In that kind of movie, obviously you want to say Tony Montana, Scarface. I'm not talking about that. The greatest villain in a conventional Hollywood-style film, Hans Gruber in Die Hard. Because he's so diabolical, so brilliant. Maybe he would rather not get his hands dirty, but you know what? If you need me to put a bullet in you to scare everybody, here it comes. He was an amazing performer, and by all accounts, he was a really good guy with apparently a wonderful sense of humor. A lot of his co-stars always talked about it. So you wouldn't think that Alan would be such a cut-up and so funny on set, but he really is. When he's not working, he can kind of take it easy and just be one of the group. No movie star vibes coming off of him, nothing like that. Just wanted to put in his day's work and see what else. And yeah, that's really all I wanted to say he probably had a lot more great performances in him. It is sad that he has been gone so long, but we will always remember the ingenious, resourceful, versatile talent that was Alan Rickman. This has been episode 450 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your Friday evening here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then,